The church in Taiwan is pretty strong. Most of the leadership within the church, the bishops, the stake presidents, the elders quorum presidents, most people are native most of them are native. Missionary work only started in the 1950s in Taiwan, so it hasn't been in the country for very long, and you're just now starting to get your first third and fourth generation LDS families, so it's pretty new, and a lot of the church is first generation converts. There are about between 50 to 60,000 members throughout the entire island, so it's definitely not a huge, and there's about 23 million people in the country of Taiwan, so it's not like there are a ton of members, but there's good sized wards in the cities, and there's branches in the smaller towns and things like that, so the church is growing, and I think that most missionaries, if you're willing to work hard and you're willing to be obedient and follow the mission rules and things like that, as long as you're trying to be a good missionary, I think most missionaries see some success and help some people to become introduced to the church and to the gospel. So yeah, so the church it's strong and it's growing, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future with it. So the mission boundaries of the Taichung Mission, it extends north. So essentially the island of Taiwan is shaped like a sweet potato is the way they describe it. And so it's just kind of it's like an oval shape. And so the Taichung Mission covers more of the southern half of the island, and the Taipei Mission, which is the other mission in Taiwan, covers the northern part of the island. I would say the Taichung Mission is more rural. There's more farmland, and there's more spaces that aren't urban. The landscape, I would say, it's pretty mountainous actually. Along the center of the island is pretty mountainous. There's lots of mountains and things like that. So if you're in those areas, you're going to be doing a lot of bike riding up hills and down hills and things like that. And there's two major cities in the mission. There's Taichung and there's Kaohsiung. Which Taichung and Kaohsiung used to be separate missions, but they actually recombined the two. Just the landscape of Taiwan is very much, there's lots of rice paddies, and if you're out in the countryside area, that's like all you'll see for miles. You're riding on a road, and there's just rice paddies everywhere. So in the southern part of the very tip of the Taichung Mission, very south, there's lots of beaches and there's lots of pretty outdoor scenery. And so my second area was it was the very, very southern tip of Taiwan, and actually we were on the Taiwan Strait, so just if you could see hundreds of miles down across the ocean would be the Philippines. And so I was on the very, very southern tip of the island, and it's kind of like Hawaii down there. At least there's like these green mountains, and it goes straight into these beautiful beaches, and there's like the ocean and things like that. So it's a really beautiful part of the island. My first area was Shihu, which is kind of a small town. It's not a very large place, and it's kind of in the middle of rice paddy country. And it was actually kind of nice to I'm from a small town originally, so it's kind of nice to start out in a small town and kind of get used to the mission and things like that. And so that was my first area. And then my second area was the very, very bottom tip of Taiwan, and it's the place called Hengqin, which is kind of like it's like the beach resort of Taiwan. So it's like what Hawaii is to us is what Hengqin was to what Hengqin was to the Taiwanese. And so there's lots of tourists in the area. There's not very many locals actually, because it's a huge tourist area, and so it's a very small branch, and most of the people in the branch had really neat occupations. There was a guy who made wooden shoes for a living, and there was one of the sisters in the branch. She owned one of the best restaurants in the area, and the other guy, he was a wood carver. And so there was a lot of it's a very cool area to serve in. There's lots to do on your preparation days, when you have time to actually go out and see things. There's a ton to do. There's waterfalls, there's national parks, there's hills, there's beaches, there's cool shops that make things, there's hot springs. We didn't go to the hot springs, but there's hot springs if you could go to the hot springs. So that was a very, very neat area. It was a little bit of a harder place in terms of missionary work because it was such a small population. There weren't a ton of people, and I felt like most people in the town or the city had been contacted by the missionaries before, so you had to kind of adapt your missionary work, your missionary style. Prior to that, we had just contacted on the streets all day, every day, You just go up and down the streets just talking to people. But in Hengchuan, you had to be a little bit smarter about it. And it was best to work with members, and it was best to work with people who knew locals and things like that. And that was a better way to get to know people in that area. And then my third area was a place, and it was in Taichung, which is in the city of Taichung, which is actually quite close to the mission home. And it was my first experience with the city, and it was quite an industrial part of the city. And it was interesting because I'd been in the countryside for the last 2 transfers. I spent most of my mission in the countryside, and so at this point I was in the city, and it was just much more fast paced, and people were a little bit ruder on the streets, and just not quite, like they were off to work and things like that. So it was a little bit of an adjustment to get used to working in the city and things like that. And I actually wasn't there for super long. I was there for about 9 weeks. And then my fourth area was a city called Yuanlin, it kind of borders the mountains of Taiwan. And it's kind of interesting because here in Utah, like the mountains are very dry and very it's almost kind of deserty looking, but in Taiwan it's just like there's so much rain and things like that. It's just these huge green tropical mountains, and it's really cool. There's a lot of wildlife in Taiwan, and lots of snakes and spiders and things like that. But Yuanli was very cool. It was kind of halfway between a city, and it was halfway between the countryside, and so it was a good size place. And it was actually a wonderful area because it had the small town vibe, but there was actually a lot of success in terms of missionary work that was happening there. People were pretty receptive and things like that, and the church it seemed like it was doing well. It was growing in that particular area. It was actually in that area that I feel like I had the most success in finding people who wanted to learn about the gospel, and I felt like I found some of my best investigators while I was actually in that area. So it was a great place. And then my very, very last area was in the city of Kaohsiung, and it was right in the heart of the city, and it was actually in one of the newer districts. So it was actually very wealthy, and there was many people driving maybe not, I don't know, some Lamborghinis, but like Audis in the street. It was a very prosperous area. And it was cool to be in the city because it was my second experience in the city. And I actually really loved Kaohsiung as a city. It's just a very beautiful city, and there's lots to do. It's a very exciting place, and there's lots of people to talk to, and so you never have a shortage of work to do while we were in the city. That was my last area, and then I finished my mission in Kaohsiung, and then I flew back to the States. So those were my 5 areas.